Ladies and gentlemen, we're all suited up and we're going to talk about Path of Exile. And the main question is the mindless grind finally over? To answer that question, we'll get to that. But first, maybe talk a little bit about what was shown yesterday and my initial impressions of this before we dive into the meat. So, overall thoughts, I think the whole patch was very exciting. I think the expeditions look really cool. The idea of going into these graveyards or sort of like abandoned terrains and then use a bunch of explosives because it's PoE, you know, we have to have explosives. You use the explosives to excavate, basically. That's typical what architects always do, right? They blow it up. And then you unveil the undead around it, you kill them, you get currency which you can trade and whatnot. Very exciting stuff. It looked cool too. With the charge that sort of like follows the fuse and then explodes, and then the enemies get over there. It was a little bit like Abyss, I think, right? In Abyss you have a similar thing where it crawls on the ground and then it, you know, creates this hole and the monsters spawn out. This was quite similar, but then it was a fuse that led there, and you can plant the explosives yourself and figure out like what do I want to unveil or make explode. Do I want to get more chests? Do I want to get more enemies? I think that's good. It sounds fun. It looks cool. I like the visuals of the enemies, like the blue animations or the blue sort of action indicators that were all over the place. I'm not sure that all of them are blue, but they stood out very much, which is what I noticed at least. Now, clearly, if you're going to equip a 25 NTX, then it might be a bit hard to see, right? But that's on you, I would say. Overall, it seems pretty clear visually. We'll see in game if that's actually true, right? Another cool thing is the trading system. It seems GGG is clearly running some sort of social experiment here, and they're gonna try out what people enjoy more, right? If they enjoy gambling, if they enjoy, I think, simply trading, if they enjoy upgrading your items, or if they enjoy upselling or upselling and haggling. Interesting stuff. I think for me it would probably be upgrading. I like no risks in that sense. I'm kind of a risk-free person, but other people may enjoy gambling, especially if the currency drops anyway. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to balance that, but it seems that you can just have the currency that you find from the expeditions, turn it into these vendors, and then I think it's your, you know, you can pick your poison in that sense on how you want to spend that currency. I think that's very cool, and yeah, I'm excited to see how that Expedition League and mechanic works out. We got 19 new skills and sport gems, which is a lot. It's one for each ascendancy, or at least one tailored to each ascendancy. Clearly, you can use these skills with any ascendancy, and I'm curious to see what people come up with. But yeah, for me, it's definitely going to be a summoner with the Reaper. That thing looks cool as hell, and it eats your other minions as well. It's a little bit like the Abomination maybe in Last Epoch, right? That also eats your other minions. This, not entirely exactly sure what the benefits are. I mean, it gets stronger, it may heal up. Not sure if there's any other benefits or if it matters which minion it eats. But if you combine it with the golems, you create a golemmancer and you make sure that your golems resurrect, right, which is one of the ascendancy points, then that might work out really well at very little investment or effort. And you don't really need to invest in golems either way, but at least, you know, you can just have 5 golems up, or at least a few golems up, and they will resummon themselves. Seems like a decent playstyle, I guess. Maybe throw some skeletons in there, some vile skeletons that gives you like 24 of them in the end or something, and then just go ham on the minions, right? I think that is cool. Spectre's probably a bad idea. Animated Guardian, bad idea, because he's eating those too, and those are not easily resummoned. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's really a cool idea, and I'm just gonna see how far we get with it. I'm pretty sure I'll be playing that. There was the announcement that the game is going to be nerfed overall by around 40%, 20 to 40%. And the main way they're going to nerf that is by reducing Flask power. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. and the other one is to make support gems less powerful. I think if you look at support gems, some of them, like for example concentrated effect, it gives around, what is it, like 50 to 56 or something % more damage of your main skill, or of the linked skill gem, and there's not that much of a downside per se, especially if you don't use AoE. So that's massive, right? And then you can link 4 more of those, and apparently what I understand, I mean I do the same thing, is that people only use these super effective support gems. And if you ever go to Lily and you browse through the other support gems that she has, I think 80 to 85% of those are hardly ever used. You see the same support gems over and over again. Those will be nerfed quite heavily in order to give the other ones a chance. Because the other ones have some really cool effects, but you'll just hardly see them being used. And I think that's cool. I think that is interesting. We'll have to see how it works out in the end. And of course, people are crying about these nerfs. People always cry about nerfs, but each and every time it's completely fine. Last, it was like 3 leagues ago or something, they nerfed the entire ascendancies, and it was totally fine, right? Everybody was totally fine. I think this is going to be the exact same thing. It might take you a little bit longer to get to endgame, and you might, not make the endgame that easily maybe, but it's always like this. It doesn't really matter. I think finally, a small observation from my end. It seems that the overall scope of this league is a little bit less than Ultimatum. In Ultimatum, they reworked all the old different systems, right? All the old league mechanics. That is not really what is happening here. This seems to be a much more focused league. But the main thing, and that brings me to the main topic, is this overall idea. I feel that they want to get rid of the playstyle where you just walk into a room, you use your ability, and everybody dies. And if everybody doesn't die, all the enemies, then you probably die, because they start hitting you and you can't take that amount of damage. That is a little bit what the critics talk about when they talk about PoE, and they clearly have a point, right? I mean, Path of Exile quite often is like that, where you just like rush through the maps and you're not really conscious about anything, honestly. You just see monsters, you go towards them, you cyclone, or you do whatever skill you use, Essence Drain, Contagion, and everybody dies. And it's fine. I mean, this has been working for years and it hasn't stopped people from playing the game, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a good system. It just means, I think, that Path of Exile has so much to offer that people keep coming back for this game, which to me makes perfect sense. I keep going back every league as well, for usually a month or something, for usually 200-300 hours. And I don't have to appreciate every aspect of the game to appreciate the thing as a whole. I think that's very important. It's got so many redeeming features too, and cool features that you don't see in any other games. So there's plenty of things to like, but they're now tackling specifically, I think, this point. And it seems to me that they have started doing this in 4 areas. The first area is in the expeditions itself. In the expeditions, you are supposed to plant explosives, and you do this by just putting charges on the map, and then the blast radius determines what happens. So you can explode certain things so that you get a bunch of chests, or that enemies spawn, but you also have modifiers, these small little structures or objects. I'm not entirely sure what they are, but they clearly have a text block above them which says something about enemy modifiers, which you see in so many things, right? You would see it in I don't know, in Harvest, for example. You have the same thing. And one of the things that happens over here is that the modifiers can be, for example, damage type immunity, meaning that monsters can be immune to physical damage. Now, that is not something that you have seen before all too often. There is the sort of the invulnerability shrine, or whatever it's called, right? That as long as the monsters are near the shrine, you can't kill them with anything, which is super annoying. But I don't really think that I've seen too many instances where monsters are actually immune to certain damage types. Maybe bosses, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think, I mean, they're resistant, but not immune. And this means that you really have to start paying attention to these modifiers, because if you don't kill everybody in the expedition, you're not gonna get the loot. And if you do a purely physical damage, and it's quite common, right, that you have not, let's say, a hybrid damage type, but you have a pure damage type, you either convert everything or you stick with whatever your skill damage type is. So this will affect people quite a bit. So if you don't pay attention or you don't make deliberate choices, and I think that is the key thing here, then you may end up having some issues. And I think, at least on paper, that is a good idea. I think it should not be the case that you can just do any expedition you want. You're just gonna plant the explosives in whatever, that you get the most stuff, basically, and the most modifiers, and then you just rush through the level, and that's it. I think it's quite cool that you have to make choices and actually read what is going on, and then, play the game. And I think up until now, that is only something that hardcore players are doing. I don't think in softcore almost anyone does that, right? So, good change, probably. We'll see how it pans out, but I'm quite excited about it. GGG started a project where they're going to slowly but surely overhaul the entire campaign. I think also in the the sort of ramp up to PoE 2, and the idea is to basically make the campaign more challenging. And they're doing that by not only giving the monsters more health, but also just giving the monsters more modifiers and making them stronger, and making them faster, and making them more intelligent. I think that was the one that stood out to me the most. The AI rework, right? That the monsters, for example, now will start to predict where you're about to move, and then cast their ranged spells in front of you, or in the direction that you're moving towards. If they actually do that, that's gonna be hilarious, right? I honestly can't wait to see what's going on there, and if this is really true, or if this is just Chris saying things, and that you don't notice this at all. I'm expecting that you notice this quite a bit, and if it is the case, once again, this means that you have to play more deliberately, right? You can't just, what's the typical skill people use? Essence Drain Contagion, I guess. Or you can't just Toxic Rain all over the place anymore. You actually have to watch your movement and your skills and whatnot. And that is cool. I think that's cool. So I hope that is actually implemented as Chris is saying. And if it is, good change. The third topic is Flasks. This league sees a big Flask rework, and with a few goals in mind. First of all, they want to reduce the spam, so that also once again means a more deliberate decision, right? You actually need to do decision making when using Flasks, which makes sense. But right now, that's not the case at all. You just do the piano thing, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and every 4 seconds or so, 3-4 seconds, completely destroying your wrists, by the way. Or you use a macro, but that's against TOS, so I wouldn't advise that per se. And because Flasks are so powerful in the current day and age, then yeah, that's kind of like the way to play the game, right? If you're not doing it, you're missing out on a lot of power or a lot of defenses. And that play style is going to be at least changed significantly. And they're basically giving you two options here, and I think those are very interesting options. And once again, they force you to make a decision here. You can, well, I guess you have three options, right? You can either do nothing and don't really impact your Flasks at all. However, you need to be aware that Flasks are changed and that you get less Flask charges these days. So that is important to note, meaning simply that you can't spam anymore, or not as much at least as you could. However, of course, if you play Pathfinder, you can still do it. And I guess if you just in a map with a ton of monsters, you may still get enough flask charges to redo the whole thing every 3-4 seconds. So the playstyle is probably not gone, but also the flask power in itself is nerfed a bit. So that's one playstyle. The second one is that there is going to be a new gem or a new orb or something that you can put on your flasks, and it's basically you give the flask a trigger. And it says, for example, if you are frozen, then activate this flask. And then clearly you do a flask of heat, right? With the suffix of heat, meaning that you are immune to freeze and chill. So the reason that that is a good idea is because basically you can automate all your flask uses. However, the catch is it only works on unique flasks and utility flasks. And I think utility flasks are basically every flask apart from mana and health flasks and hybrid flasks. I'm leaning towards that approach for sure, because I think that would just, create a much more relaxed and casual playstyle. But it will also mean that, it's not the most effective thing in the world. And I'm not entirely sure if you put an automated trigger on it, that you can also still manually use it. If that's the case, that's totally fine, but I'm curious. And the other option, the third option that you can play, is you can put another gem or orb or whatever on it, and that way it makes the flasks much stronger and basically puts it back to the power level that flasks are currently, but you get even less flask charges. Once again, making a much more deliberate choice, and now you really have to be mindful of when you use flasks, right? Because it seems that, in this case, there's really no way you're going to be able to refill your flasks. Also because of the duration of the flask, while the duration is active, the flasks actually don't regain charges. So that's very interesting, and I think that's very good stuff. And another final point about the flasks, which is very important and leads me to the final point as well for the, the mindless gameplay thing, is that the flasks, they don't really work preemptively anymore. You can't, let's say, use a flask of dousing and then get ignited, and then you're immune to ignite. That's not how it works. The flask effects only work if you trigger them or if you use them after you get an ailment, and then for the duration of the flask you are ailment immune. It is not the other way around anymore, that whenever you use a flask you are ailment immune. So that is a huge change, right? A huge change, which leads me into the fourth topic, which is mapping. So previously, whenever you were mapping and you were just rolling maps, what would typically happen is you just have a map tab or something. You roll all your maps, and then you do some sorting, right? If you are, let's say, purely elemental, you take out the reflect elemental, and maybe you take out all the mods that have players cannot regen mana or something, or maybe energy shield, and because those are just too annoying to run. And that's it. Everything else you were either immune by ailment immunity, either in your build, or you just have the flasks up that you typically have, right? The off heat, the warding, and bleed immunity, right? Staunching, right? Of staunching. That won't really work anymore. Specifically the warding flask, right? Specifically curses, because you get less charges. You're gonna have to be very careful about running cursed maps, because previously you could just basically negate the whole cursed maps effect, because you could always have, or almost always have, your flask of warding up. It's very, very questionable if that is still possible for you. So once again, they have created a system also now in the mapping where you have to be much more conscious and much more deliberate about which maps you run. You can't just run each and every map anymore, because you can create all sorts of immunities along the way, either by builds or by flasks. And I think also the ailment immunity in certain builds is going to be nerfed to force you to think about this more. I am not sure how this is going to work out, honestly, because I think a lot of people will experience this as a nuisance. And if you can't run maps with 5 or 6 modifiers on it, like plenty of curses, and then also the regular stuff that you already couldn't run, like reflect and maybe some region stuff, yeah, is it how fun is it still going to be, right? Aren't we making it a little bit too punishing? Maybe that's the case, but also maybe it's not going to be that bad. At least what needs to happen is you'll have to do a lot more filtering and trying to figure out which cursed maps you are willing to run and which you are not. So maybe to conclude, I think overall the changes are good changes. I like the idea of having a more deliberate and less grindy and less sort of spammy playstyle, because that isn't necessarily what I enjoy in PoE. What I enjoy is creating the builds and then upgrading your character and just playing the game in general. I just really love playing the game, and I don't mind a bit more decision making, as long as it doesn't get out of hand. Let's say if the game starts to lose a significant part of the action, because now you need to read all sorts of stuff, I don't think that is the intention either. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. You just have to pay a bit more attention. So yeah, that's the direction that they're headed in, and I think this is not a trend that's going to stop anytime soon, so you have to be aware of that, I think. That's it, ladies and gents. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.